Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Nick Blumberg. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. Here's what we're looking at. Inflation drops, but will it last as the country's war with Iran reignites? We hear from the head of Chicago's Federal Reserve Bank. And less in-home care, more institutionalization is what disability advocates fear a new Department of Justice memo signals. First off tonight, pointed questions for President Donald Trump's pick for the next United States Attorney General. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche faced the Senate Judiciary Committee in a hearing earlier today. After the death of Senator Lindsey Graham, just one Republican defection could sink Blanche's nomination. And Texas Senator John Cornyn, who was defeated by a Trump-backed primary challenger, appeared skeptical of Blanche. So too was Democratic Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, who pressed Blanche to meet with 10 Jeffrey Epstein victims who were at the hearing. Blanche says the DOJ already has a point person to meet with victims, and Blanche claims he couldn't do so personally if they had legal counsel.
I think you ought to be in the room because you ought to hear this. You had singular responsibility for these files. There's a delay in meeting the statutory requirement of disclosure. You were involved in that. I think you ought to be part of this.
I am definitely part of it, and I have been from day one.
And it will be done within the next 30 days?
I can keep on repeating myself, but I said it could get done as soon as today. It could have gotten done last week. We remain available to meet with any victim or their representative at any time.
Blanche also faced questions about President Trump's pardons of January 6th rioters, immigration agents at polling places, subpoenas issued to journalists, and sweeping protections granted to the president and his family from tax audits. Senate Republican leaders say they plan to call a vote on Blanche's nomination before the August recess. TIF money, a funding freeze, and a week of furlough days. That's how Chicago Public Schools plans to close a huge budget gap the district is facing next year. Officials released a $9.88 billion budget proposal today. To close a $732 million budget gap, CPS CEO Macklin King says the spending plan relies on $200 million in tax increment financing funding from the city. It'll also implement a mid-year spending freeze across the district. CPS also expects some 760 teachers and 801 support personnel to be laid off, though they say the district has typically rehired around 75% of affected employees in past years. And it's changing 5 professional development days into unpaid furlough days. Officials say those furlough days were a last resort option and won't affect instructional time. We've got more details on our website. Chicago City Council members pass a $425 million plan to subsidize the new Chicago Fire Stadium. The funds will come from the area's tax increment financing, or TIF districts. The 22,000-seat soccer stadium broke ground in the South Loop back in March. The money will be used to connect the stadium to the city's street grid, repair the river wall, improve nearby metro tracks, and fund an underground parking garage. A public plaza will be built on top of the garage, and 6 acres of parkland will be open to the public, according to the plans. Up next, the head of Chicago's Federal Reserve Bank on the latest inflation numbers and what they mean for consumer costs. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Inflation has been a thorn in the side of many Americans over the past 5 years. Making matters worse is the recent uncertainty from tariffs and the Iran war. Meanwhile, change is afoot at the Federal Reserve Bank. Kevin Warsh was confirmed as the new chair, and the central bank may be updating how it communicates rate changes. Here to break down what it all means for the country and for Chicago is Austan Goolsbee, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So what do the latest inflation numbers tell us?
Well, you never want to make too much hay out of any one number. You know, as I would say, 1 month is no months. You want to get several months before you think it's a trend. We've been going the wrong way with inflation for several months in a row, but these newest numbers that we got this week were encouraging. the slowing down a little bit of the inflation that we've seen over the past several months. And if we got more months like the ones that we got this week, people, I think, would be feeling perhaps a bit more comfortable.
And how does the Chicago area compare to what we're seeing nationally?
In Chicago, the inflation rate, it tends to be about the same in most parts of the country. We've been dealing, as you know, throughout the Midwest and in Chicago in particular, that population growth has been slower in the Midwest than it has been in the rest of the country. And so we have been dealing a little bit with that on the job market side. But on inflation, that tends to be similar inflation rates everywhere.
We mentioned the conflict with Iran at the top. What sort of effect is the uncertainty over the Strait of Hormuz having on prices?
Nothing good. Ever since the war began, everybody that's driving a car, look out the window. You know what's been happening to inflation, especially on energy and gasoline prices. Now, that was supposed to be going away and started going away as you add these uncertainties that the conflict flares back up and might last a fair bit longer than what people had been anticipating or than the market futures contracts had been forecasting. I think that's part of why you're seeing consumer confidence being as weak as it is in these measures of consumer confidence, that people are weighing the uncertainties that maybe the price of gasoline is going to stay much higher than where they thought it was going to be for longer than it has.
And beyond oil, beyond gas prices, are we seeing any supply chain issues related to the war?
A little bit, but not much yet, because in the run-up to the conflict, people had a little bit of an idea that this was coming, and they had built up some inventories. So you haven't seen as much of an impact on, let's call it, broader supply chain measures as you will see likely if the conflict continues for months and months more. Now, that said, the impact of higher energy prices is most directly felt at the gas pump or flying on airlines, anybody who's using the fuels. But then you will likely see that work its way through the economy, spill over onto the cost of FedEx packages, people who are using the vehicles. You'll see it in logistics, shipping, transportation. And so the way that factors into broader inflation outside of just the energy sector, you are likely to see that continue a bit. And even if all the conflict ended by tonight, it's still going to take some time to reestablish, once the conflict ends, reestablish the production capacity, some of which was blown up. So I do think we want to be realistic about how quickly we can return to normal, even when the uncertainty is resolved.
Yeah. Well, another, question that a lot of folks have of when things might get back to more of a normal baseline, even with tariffs no longer in place, are they still impacting consumer prices?
Yeah, it's hard to say, because there's still another shoe to drop, that the administration, some tariffs were disallowed, and there might even be refunds. But they've announced that they intend to replace all of those tariffs at approximately the rates that they were before. So to the extent that that still hangs over us, I do think that you're seeing that partly still factoring into kind of the consumer calculus. That said, done as a one-and-done tariffs are supposed to raise the prices, the level of prices once, but they're not supposed to be an extended inflationary thing. And part of the dilemma, let's call it, that the war began before the tariff impact on inflation had kind of worn away, we're still living with that. And hopefully the drop down of the inflation rate can still take place, at least for the tariff part, regardless of what happens from the oil shock part.
Yeah. You know, your district spans, 5 states in the Midwest. What are you seeing in the labor market in our region?
Mostly the labor market, these 5 states, kind of heart of the Midwest, as you say, most of Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana. The labor market has been stable, but hasn't been great. It's not deteriorating. It's not getting better. And there's conflicting measures. The hiring rate is extremely low as what normally corresponds with a recession. But the layoff rate is also extremely low, what normally corresponds with the height of a boom. So we're still kind of trying to wrap our heads around this labor market where those two things are happening simultaneously. It's very unusual. I think that's because of the degree of uncertainty that businesses are facing. They don't want to let go of people that it took them a long time and it was hard to get. But they don't want to bring in new people because what if the tariff rates change? What if the geopolitics changes in the short run? So we're in a little bit of a holding pattern. I think that mostly characterizes the labor market throughout the Midwest, is that stable without being that strong.
As we mentioned at the top, Kevin Warsh was confirmed as the chair of the Federal Reserve in May. What's your working relationship like with him?
Pretty good. I knew him. I was in the first term of the Obama administration during the financial crisis, and that was when then Governor Warsh was at the Fed as a Fed governor, and I kind of went through the financial crisis working pretty closely with him. I welcome all institutions. It's helpful to have some new rethinks and his task forces where he's going to look at 5 major issues facing the Fed, like the measurement of inflation and how we communicate and how we discuss rates and the nature of the data and the size of the balance sheet. It's good that we think those things through. Let's have a discussion about reforming the way the Fed does business.
Right.
I think he's a serious guy. I saw his actions in a moment of real stress in the economy at 2009, 10, 11.
Certainly battle tested then, yes.
So I'm optimistic.
Well,
yeah,
before we
tested. That's the next word.
Before we run out of time, one of the potential changes here is that Warsh announced the end of what's called forward guidance from the central bank. What's the significance of that? Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, he did indeed. That's a fancy central banker's phrase for discussing what the committee or the central bank thinks is going to happen in the future to rates. That's the forward guidance, giving guidance. The committee thinks it will do X, Y, Z in the future. He wants to do less of that. And I'm sympathetic to doing less of that. I think speculating about rates runs the risk that you can undermine the credibility of the central bank. Anytime the central bank is saying, we think we're going to do X, well, you don't know what the conditions are going to be when it actually comes to that circumstance. And then if you end up not doing it, the market and the public say, they made us a promise and then they didn't carry it out. So your credibility takes a hit. So I'm not supposed to speak for anybody else, only for myself on the FOMC. I welcome that. Let's rethink a bit the forward guidance and some of the speculation about the future.
All right, Austan Goolsbee of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, we thank you for your time.
Yeah, great to see you again.
Coming up, are civil rights protections for Americans with disabilities at risk? We explore that next. The Justice Department memo is raising new questions about decades of civil rights protections for Americans with disabilities. The memo challenges the Americans with Disabilities Act integration mandate, which requires states to provide services that enable people with disabilities to live in their own communities rather than institutions. The memo itself isn't legally enforceable, but a new federal case challenging the integration mandate could eventually reach the U.S. Supreme Court. Joining us to discuss more are Mark Ishog, CEO of Thresholds, a nonprofit that provides mental health services in the Chicago area; Karen Tamley, CEO of Access Living, a nonprofit that helps Chicagoans with disabilities live independently or at home; and Barry Taylor, a law lecturer at the University of Chicago, specializing in disability rights. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So, Barry Taylor, if I can start with you, please. Can you break down what's in the memo for us? What is the Justice Department arguing here?
Well, the memo is trying to relitigate the case called Olmstead, and that's a really seminal case that the U.S. Supreme Court decided in 1999. Justice Ginsburg issued an opinion that basically said that unjustified isolation and segregation is discrimination under the ADA. And she pointed to a DOJ regulation that said that, as you mentioned, people should be served in the most integrated setting. And what we're seeing in this memo, and I want to make clear, it's a memo. It's not a regulation. It's not a change in the law. Only Congress can change the law. The memo is saying maybe this Supreme Court didn't get it right. Maybe all the courts across the country didn't get it right. Maybe DOJ's 3 decades of enforcing the ADA didn't get it right. Maybe we should relook at this thing. And it's really wrong-headed in its approach, because it's bringing up something that makes no sense if you look at the ADA, if you look at Justice Ginsburg's opinion, and if you look at all the cases that have been decided over the last 27 years.
So a pretty significant reversal there. Karen Tamley, can you walk us through the kinds of at-home services for people with disabilities that are targeted by this memo?
Sure. I think the thing that we're most concerned about is the right of folks with disabilities to live at home in the community with the supports that they need. So things like assisting someone getting out of bed, bathing, dressing, meal preparation, all the things that keep people living independently, living in their own home, with the ability then to go out and get a job, to participate in their community, to go to church, to socialize. It's a real threat, and the disability community is rightfully concerned about this.
Yeah, are you concerned we could see some states stop providing those sorts of at-home services for folks with disabilities because of this memo?
That's the concern, and like Barry said, while this is not law, we are concerned that this memo could be used as a justification to not advance home and community-based services, or use it as a defense if states are challenged around the integration mandate. And so that's the real concern for us, is how this memo is going to be used. And we already know that there are some examples where it is being used as a defense. We're concerned about how it can shape public opinion. And just knowing that the DOJ doesn't necessarily have our back anymore when it comes to fighting for community inclusion is a serious concern.
Yeah. Mark Ishog, why is it important for folks with disabilities to be as integrated into their communities as possible?
Yeah, exactly. So this also includes people with invisible disabilities, people with mental illness. And as Barry said, Olmstead got it right. And we in Illinois have gotten it right for the last 16 or 17 years. Thresholds is one of the largest providers of community-based mental health services in Illinois. In the last 16 years, we've moved almost 1,800 people from institutional settings, nursing homes, specialized nursing homes for people with mental illness, into the community, where they have lived and thrived, lived independently. Many people have gone back to work, reunited with family and friends. The road to mental health recovery is in the community, and we have shown that this works.
Yeah. As we've been discussing this, the Olmstead case that the Supreme Court decided, even if this doesn't have the effect of law, as Karen was mentioning, are there concerns potentially that people could see this as some sort of official guidance from the Department of Justice, or at least treat it that way, even if it doesn't necessarily carry that weight?
Right. That's why I think it's really important for us to be talking about this, that it is not a change in the law, and people should recognize that. Interestingly, DOJ's memo itself says that their memo is out of step with precedent across the country, out of step with the Supreme Court, out of step with the law, and they also warn states that if you follow our memo, you could get sued for disability discrimination. So not only does the memo not make any sense, why any state would rely on this memo when they could be subject to litigation for disability discrimination makes no sense whatsoever. So this whole thing is really a distraction, I think, more than anything. And the biggest concern I have is that not only would states try to use it to support their position to avoid integrating people with disabilities, but we're also going to lose DOJ's committed implementation of the ADA. They have cases across the country that they've worked on where thousands of people have gotten into the community, and I'm afraid that DOJ may take a step back, at least under this current administration, and not do what they are charged by Congress to do, which is to implement and enforce the ADA.
Yeah. Doesn't this feel like a continued assault on poor and marginalized communities?
Absolutely.
That's what it feels like to me. Like, this memo is so similar to the Medicaid reform that we're facing, where millions of people will lose their Medicaid coverage in this country, hundreds of thousands in Illinois. The assault on permanent supportive housing that has allowed people to live independently in the community with support services that Access Living and Thresholds and our partners provide. So this is part of a pattern of targeting the most vulnerable people in the community, and it's not based in evidence, it's not based in science. We know that supportive housing with wraparound services in the community works for people with disabilities and for people with mental illness. We have at Threshold 70 years of evidence to prove this.
Well, and I also think that as we're seeing more pressure on states, particularly with H.R. 1 and the cuts to Medicaid, states are going to be forced to make some really difficult decisions, very potentially harmful decisions. And I think what's also concerning is that home and community-based services are optional under Medicaid, whereas institutionalization is an entitlement. Right. And so when the state has more financial Medicaid pressure, what are we going to potentially be using? Not just Illinois, but any state in the country. Yeah. We could lose home and community-based services. And our fear is that this memo will just be one more justification to cut and to justify home and community-based services. So that's another concern.
Yeah, I mean, and how prepared do you see Illinois being to keep providing these sorts of at-home services that afford the flexibility, the dignity that you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we want the governor to stand strong around the right of people with disabilities in Illinois to be able to live in the community. We know it's more humane. We know it's exponentially cheaper to keep people in their own homes versus in institutions. And so we can actually save money by community-based services. And it's what people want. Yeah. They don't want to live in segregated settings where they're subjected to isolation, potentially abuse, neglect. That's been our history as a community, and we don't want that again. We don't want to go back.
Yeah. I think the good news is, excuse me, Karen, I was just going to say the good news is that when this memo came out, Governor Pritzker did put out a statement saying that disability rights are civil rights and that they were not going to back down from their commitment to integration and inclusion. And we hope that that holds true, because the state is in the process, as Mark referenced, to implementing 3 major consent decrees that are integrating thousands and thousands of people with disabilities. And this memo shouldn't reverse that really important work that's being done.
And this is about real people, right? Yeah. This is not just about the thousands of people that we have collectively moved safely into the community. This is about Jan. Barry knows Jan well. 16 years ago, we helped Jan move out of a nursing home, and she's been in her own apartment for 16 years. Safe and healthy in Hyde Park. She's working, she's an artist. This is about Ariana in Kankakee in a nursing home. She moved out 10 years ago. We moved her safely into the community. She's about to get her bachelor's in social work. She's going for her master's degree. She's got a job. She's an artist. She lost 100 pounds and took care of herself and her life. Yeah. This is transformative. So this is thousands and thousands of people we're talking about, but these 2 examples should really hit home with people. This is about real people.
Well, and certainly, we heard about the commitment from Governor Pritzker. It is somewhat of a difference, matter in other states. I know there's a multi-state federal lawsuit, Texas v. Kennedy, that's going through the courts right now, challenging the integration mandate. What could that mean?
Well, they've already, when this memo came out, they did say we want to supplement our arguments and add this memo to the mix for the judge to look at. So there are states that are using this memo. Again, We think it's just a memo. It really doesn't have any kind of precedential or enforcement authority. So we're hopeful that the judges aren't going to take the bait and that they'll recognize it for what it is, which is really a policy that makes no sense and is contrary to Supreme Court precedent.
Yeah, we've got just about 30 seconds left, but I mean, Karen Tamley, are you hopeful that that argument and those many years of evidence of the positive effects of folks being in the community will win the day?
I do. I am hopeful, and we're fighting for that every single day, not just access living and thresholds, but the disability community across the country is very much on top of this and doing everything we can to push back against this memo.
Yeah, certainly an issue very close to a lot of folks' hearts. That's all the time we have for this conversation, unfortunately. Mark Ishog, Karen Tamley, Barry Taylor, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Local groups reflect on Larry Snelling's tenure following his retirement as Chicago's top cop. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that contributes to public safety policy and guidelines.